Sameach, everyone. When I was a rabbinical student, I had a wonderful opportunity to go on a retreat with other Jewish and Christian seminary students. Before each meal, someone from one of the schools was selected to lead grace. And our Christian colleagues would clasp their hands, and they would bow their heads, and they would say the most beautiful prayers. It just came tumbling out of their mouths as if they talked to God all the time. Now, to be fair, we talk to God all the time too, but we usually started out with the words, Baruch Atah Adonai. We weren't quite sure what to do with this spontaneous prayer business, and our turn was at the end of the week. So we spent the whole week deciding to honor each other. No, you lead the prayer, we're right behind you. But finally, we were struck with genius. And on the day it was our turn to lead prayer before meal, we took a roll and we held it reverently in the air and we said very seriously, what did we say? Hamotzi lechem min ha'aretz, and the Christian said, oh, what a beautiful, profound incantation, and we saved the reputation of the Jewish people as being capable of doing prayer. I think this story illustrates that Jewish prayer is not always easy, and it also illustrates the two pillars of prayer, keva and kavanah. Keva are the fixed words on the page, and kavanah is our intention, our feeling behind the words. But more on that later. I'd like to spend this morning discussing the challenges of prayer, encouraging all of us to know that we do possess some talents to help us overcome these challenges, figuring out together why it might be worth overcoming these challenges, what are the benefits of a life of prayer, and examining a little further the ideas of keva and kavanah. Let's start with the challenges. If I were to ask people in this room to raise their hands, and you don't have to do this, but if I were to ask, who came here this morning sure that 5 hours of ceaseless prayer would lift up your souls to an unachievable height so that you would be capable of the best tshuva you've ever accomplished? I don't think I'd have many takers. But stick with me on this, I do have a point. I think if I asked the question, who in this room is a world-class musician or athlete, very few of us would raise our hands either. But if I asked the question, how many of us enjoy playing a musical instrument or playing a sport, I think I'd see many more hands being raised. I play the piano and the guitar very badly, but I enjoy it. My fingers are clumsy. My sense of rhythm at best might be called funky. But I'll tell you what, I have great musicality. Musicality means that I have a natural sense for when to make the song slower or faster, louder or softer. It's musicality that brings out the emotion of a musical piece or the musical themes of the piece. And at that, I'm very good. So too with us and our prayer lives. Okay, so not all of us are fluent in Hebrew, but I bet that some of us have a natural inclination to notice God's presence in the world, while others have a deep reverence for the traditions of our people, or a sense of obligation to support the community in prayer. We all have something that we can bring to our prayer lives already. And here's the great news about practice. When you practice, you get better. I started learning Für Elise this past spring. I think you know that tune. Da 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 da. Right. Well, I wish I'd started recording myself in March playing it, because I think when I get frustrated now with some of the mistakes that I'm still making in the piece, I could play back where I started in the spring and realize just how far I've come. One of the pleasures for me in practicing music is I actually am getting better. I wonder if I had a recording of 8-year-old Rabbi Zelony reciting the Via Hafta. I think you know that tune as well. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. I wonder if we could also mark the improvements that I've made over the years, not just how fluidly the Hebrew crosses my lips, and not just how many more of the words I've come to understand, but what am I feeling when I pray? What is the emotional and spiritual experience? That prayer has been with me through a lot of my human development, and I think it has become more precious to me over time. Now, with the piece Für Elise, I can now maneuver the sound, because I've practiced it so often, to convey the emotion that I wish to convey. And the same has become true for me of the Ve'ahavta. There are days when one line is highlighted for me over another because of my repetition with it. See, we often say, here are the problems with Jewish prayer. It's in a foreign language, it's repetitive, it's archaic, and sometimes the values and theologies in those prayers seems antithetical to modern American values and theologies. However, I can guarantee you that if you would like to practice, perhaps improving your Hebrew, perhaps engaging in study on the prayers so you better understand them, perhaps developing more discipline or concentration in your prayers, just like I'm getting better at playing Für Elise, we could get better at prayer. All right, so we've named the difficulties, and we've talked about how some of us already have innate skill and can improve upon the skills that we lack. But why bother? I mean, that sounds like a lot of work to me. Why should we improve our prayer lives? What are some of the benefits of prayer? Well, we can look at the story from the Haftorah today to get an idea of some of the reasons one might put the energy into doing this. It's the story of Hannah. The summary of the story is that Hannah was childless. She went to the altar in Shiloh and prayed for a child, and it was granted to her. She then dedicated her son Samuel to a life in the priesthood. By the way, efficacious prayer, in my opinion, prayer that is effective, does not mean that our prayers are answered. That rarely happens in my experience, and when it does, it's never quite in the way that one was expecting it to happen. I think that efficacious prayer is a little different than that. I think it's when we're moved emotionally and spiritually by our prayers. I think it's when we feel connected to notice the community and the world around us. And I think it's when we're open to connecting to God, whether that is a deity in our minds or some flowing force throughout the universe. And this is the kind of experience that Hannah had. Her story is brought to us in the Talmud as the paradigm of what prayer can be. Rabbi Eliezer says, how did she pray? And he looks at some of the words in the texts. It says, he medaberet al liba, which should mean, if you read it on a surface level, she prayed in her heart. In other words, she was whispering to herself. She wasn't praying aloud. But Rabbi Eliezer in the Talmud says that's not it. She prayed what was inside of her heart. She let all of that emotion come forth in a raw manner in her prayer. And this is what she prayed, according to Rabbi Eliezer. She said, ruler of the universe, you created woman with many parts to function. You gave woman eyes to see, ears to hear, hands to do good work, legs to walk, to move, and you gave me breasts, God, to nurse, so please grant me a child so I can fulfill my purpose. Rabbi Eliezer describes this prayer as brash, but he doesn't mean it in a negative way, because remember, she's being seen as a paradigm for how to offer prayer. What he means is that she was able to be fully present in her prayer. She could crack her heart open and say, this is what I yearn for. And this is the first benefit that I will tell you prayer can bring. It's dveikut, a feeling of closeness to God. Human beings have longings. We have yearnings for things that we lack. Sometimes it's wanting to know that our sorrows will pass. Other times, it's wanting to know that we're not alone in the world. and particularly during the high holidays, it's wanting to feel hopeful that we can change the things about ourselves that bring us shame. These yearnings are not easy to express. People sometimes share these longings with friends or family. Others use the help of a psychologist. Still others may write them down in a journal. And it's this expression of yearning for what we lack that is the first step to acquiring that for which we yearn. Hannah poured forth her raw yearning. And often when we share what it is in our hearts that we're truly wanting, we feel closer to the person we share that with. Sometimes that happens with God. And when we feel that closeness, it's called dveikut. That's the first benefit of prayer. Now, Hannah had spent a lot of time wrapped up in her own pain. And it is very painful to be childless. But until she started praying at the altar in Shiloh, she had never thought very much about what her motherhood could accomplish for the rest of the world. It was all about her. And suddenly she found these words leaving her lips. She said, "God, if you grant me a child, I will dedicate that child to the priesthood." On a surface level, that could be seen as she's trying to make a bargain with God to get what she wants. But I think it's deeper than that. She suddenly came to the realization that this was not all about her. She experienced mochin b'gadlut, an expansion of her consciousness to include the community and the world around her. And she realized that the child that might be born could serve some purpose in the world, could do some good in the world. And remember that priest who found Hannah praying and thought she was drunk at first, Eli? Well, it turns out that Eli had 2 sons, but neither of them were fit or interested in being priests. And he was coming to the conclusion that he was going to need an apprentice to serve the people in Shiloh after his death. And that's exactly what Hannah's son Samuel did. So prayer can lead us to mochin b'gadlut. It can take us out of our own personal world and bring us into the world around us. It can expand our consciousness. And finally, Hannah's prayer led her to ma'asim tovim, to good deeds. She didn't pray and then forget what she had said. She was moved to action. The story continues, and it tells us that when the boy was weaned, she did bring him to the temple to start training with Eli. I can only imagine how painful it is to separate oneself from a child so young, and all the more so one that had so long been awaited, with no guarantee that another child would ever be born. But she did it. And I think ma'asim tovim, good deeds, are often this way. I feel great after I've done them, but maybe the impetus to do them, not so easy. It's not easy to give of our money, of our time, and of our love to the world. We need to have some strength of will to do so. And prayer can be one of the things that strengthens that resolve to take action. By the way, we're not told that Hannah is especially good at prayer. She's not of a priestly class. It doesn't describe her as pious or faithful. She's like you and me. She's just a person pouring out her heart. And from this outpouring, she reaps the benefits of dveikut, a feeling of closeness to her Creator, of mochin b'gadlut, an expansion of her consciousness to include the world around her. And finally, she's moved to ma'asim tovim, to do something good in the world. So, to recap, we've discussed some of the difficulties with prayer. We've talked about how each of us already possess some of the skills we might need, and that we can develop skills. And we've discussed the benefits of prayer. Let's go back to that fateful retreat with the Christians and the Jews. I said that it exemplified some of the challenge of Jewish prayer, as well as 2 elements that are needed in Jewish prayer. So the first is keva. That's the fixed words. That's when the rabbinical students fell back on the wisdom of the ages and said, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. That's our Haggadah, our Machzor, our Siddur, the words that have been said over the centuries by our people to bring meaning to significant moments. That gives us our roots. But the second thing we need is kavanah, and that's what our Christian colleagues were displaying for us when they could just close their eyes and pour forth what was in their hearts to bless that moment. That's what gives our prayer wings. And it's when you take the roots of keva, the fixed words on the page, and you pour into it your own kavanah, your own focus, your own intention and feeling, that the words of our ancestors, and hopefully our descendants, suddenly become powerful. They become our own. I think we should start our prayer practice together today. Let's start improving our spiritual practice today. I'm going to give you 2 assignments for the Musaf service. The first will help with your keva, your understanding or appreciation of fixed prayer. Find a prayer during the Musaf service that is familiar to you, that you love, and allow yourself to think about all the people who have said this prayer before you on this day, and all the people who may say it after you. That's keva. Appreciate the richness of the language that can express so beautifully one of the sentiments of the high holidays. That's keva. And here's your kavanah exercise. When you get restless, because it's Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, when you get restless, put your prayer book down, close your eyes, and in your heart, just like Hannah, ask yourself, what is it that I yearn for? Ask yourself, how can I expand my consciousness this year to include the rest of the people around me? And be moved to Ma'asim Tovim. What is it you want to do with your tshuva this year? What is it you want to do better? Take a moment and really savor it. Now, if that was a good experience for you, you don't have to stop on Rosh Hashanah, by the way. This year, the improvement of our spiritual practice will be an area of focus for me. I will be teaching a Jewish spirituality class on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock. After Simchat Torah, the first class is October 11th. We will be moving through the Jewish prayers, looking at them from a keva and kavanah angle. We've also invited a scholar in residence this spring. He is a musician named Joey Weissenberg, and his specialty is helping congregations sing more and feel the music of the service more profoundly. You might consider dedicating yourself to coming to services more often to practice these new skills. Or you can make an appointment with me and we can discuss some very beginning steps. Perhaps learning to bless your food before you eat it, or say the Shema before you fall asleep at night. It doesn't have to all be done at once, but I can guarantee you that all of us are capable of feeling dveikut, a closeness to God, mochin begadlut, an expansion of our consciousness, and ma'asim tovim, being moved to do action in the world. Now, I know that I will continue to practice Fur Elise this year. And sometimes I'll take a technically difficult part of the piece and I'll run my fingers over it and over it and over it until it's that much smoother. That's the keva of the piece. And sometimes I'll take a passage and I will play with the musicality of it, and I will see which emotions I can elicit from the very same notes. That's the kavanah of the piece. I promise you I'm going to be doing the same thing in my spiritual life with my tefillah. You see, the reason that people are playing Fur Elise 200 years after it was composed, and the reason that people are still davening the words of the Siddur thousands of years after some of them were composed, is that they do possess these 2 pillars, keva and kavanah. I hope you'll join me this year in developing your own spiritual practice, and I bless all of us to be like our ancestor Hannah, so that we will find meaning in the ancient art of tefillah. Chag Sameach.